Hey, good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning to you.
How's my voice sound? I've been sick for 3 weeks straight.
Oh my goodness. Well, it sounds better than it did last time we
Yeah,
talked.
God, it was just horrible
You can
last time.
barely
Now I
croak
just
on the
have a
sound.
slight sore throat, but I don't even know what it was. And I'm with Kaiser, not to disparage Kaiser, but they just said, "Yeah, you got a virus. We'll be 3 weeks. Stick out with it." I go, "Well, should I
Yeah.
get tested for COVID?" And they go, "What for?" And I go, "Well, is there a drug or something?" They go, "Yeah, the drug has side effects, though. You sure? Why don't you just go home and rest?" Well, I can't go
Yeah.
home and rest anyway. So I feel better today, but I don't think I look good.
Yeah.
So the weekend before the election, and you, by the way, since this is a health related show, I guess you were totally recovered from your surgery,
I'd say 99%, I'm not back to full activity, but yeah,
and it's private what you had, or it's public.
kidney stones and it was a rough go there for a while,
It
but
is a completely evil little whatever it is
yeah.
diagnosis. So it is just a nasty little stone.
Well, the nice thing is that when you talk to other people who've been through it, they all say the same thing, which is that whatever you do to get rid of the kidney stone is less painful than the kidney stone. And
Yeah,
you've already been through the hardest part, which is having the kidney stone. And
God, it
it
is so
really is
evil.
true. The week that preceded all of the, procedures was much worse than the procedures and the recovery. So,
Yeah,
uh,
agreed. Yeah, well, my first one was at age 22, and my last one was probably at age 45 or so. And I haven't had one for like 13 years, which I don't know what's going on with that.
well, I'm on a medication that's to prevent the growth of further ones, but so this one is an old one, but
I
that
know.
finally.
Speaking of Kaiser, they never given me I've had it 4 times, and they never give. Anyway, this is not a show
Wow.
on
All
Kaiser.
right, enough. We're just a couple old men talking about this. This should be done over at a coffee
No
shop or
kidding.
something.
No
Well,
kidding. Well, it's probably better than talking about the election. So, Professor, we are just 3 or 4 days away from the most important election in the history of the United States. I don't even mean that flippantly. I think it's pretty important. But I'm not sure it's the most important. So why don't we just start with that? Was there an election that was really important in the United States? Why don't you rank the top three most? And you can include this as number one if you want. But what are the three most important elections in the history of the United States? Presidential elections.
um, number one, I'd probably say is number one. So George selecting George Washington to be the first president,
Who
and
ran
then
against Washington?
pardon?
Who ran against Washington?
Nobody.
Well, why is that an important election then?
Because he was the one who was going to establish the precedent that uh, we should admire and select people who do not seek power. And so you elect somebody who is of the highest character and the universally trusted to protect the results of the American Revolution.
Well, that's pretty neat then, and he is pretty universally applauded. Except today, there's a new movement to discredit Washington, right?
well, I guess there's always been one.
What which
Well,
which movement? There may be two movements to discredit Washington then.
Well, I mean, Thomas Jefferson was trying to discredit Washington by his second term in office. So, which brings me to, I would say, the next most important election is probably the one that selected Thomas Jefferson. So I'd say the third one is probably the second most important one because then we did the thing that is um, hardest to do, which is to have a peaceful transfer of power to a political opposition. So I'd say, in terms of importance, number one and number three are probably the two most important. The next uh, most important election was probably Abraham Lincoln's reelection. Well, I guess you'd have to put his election and his reelection. So I'm not sure if I would rank. I guess I'd rank his election as number three and his reelection as number four. Um, then probably go with um, boy, this is tough. Maybe, probably um, Grant or McKinley.
I
Um,
study those people.
yeah, well, just important to make sure that the results of the same, I mean, in essence, the same thing that I would say about Washington, which is making sure that you preserve the results of the Civil War. So,
Okay. Okay.
Grant being put in place to make sure that the results of the Civil War were not undone. And then McKinley sort of unifying the United States behind an opposition to the many challenging ideologies of the late 19th century. Um, and then I would probably go with throw you a curveball and say the midterm election that's um, after World War I that rejected Woodrow Wilson, that sent Republicans control of the Senate, meaning that that Wilsonian excesses were defeated, and then Franklin Roosevelt.
Which one?
Yes, the fact that I mean, some people would make the case that 32 is the most important election in American history. I think I'd put it in this sort of mid 5 to 7 range, but a lot of other historians would rank it higher because of the potential of electing someone who did not believe in representative institutions. So they say, and this is what my advisor Alonzo Hamby, the argument he made, that the most important thing about the election of 1932 was that that representative government survived. So there's a book he wrote called "For the Survival of Democracy," but which was kind of a look at the choices that other countries made and how important it was that the United States selected a Democratic leader who might have looked up to some bad people like Woodrow Wilson, but at least still believed in the basics of the American system, and his decision-making and values were still all rooted in the United States. I think the election of 1952 was also pretty consequential. I mean, Eisenhower only decided to run for president because he believed that if he didn't run for president, that the two-party system in America wouldn't survive, that the New Deal coalition had proven to be so durable that someone like Harry Truman could get reelected in 48, and that a bunch of nutcases were going to take over the Republican Party if he didn't step in and save it. And I think that proved to be pretty important. And then let's see. Probably the next one that I would say would probably be the election of 1980.
Reagan.
Reagan being elected in 80.
Why was that so important? I know Carter wasn't a great president, but why was that so
Well,
important?
it's hard to I mean, we were in a mood in the 70s that was very much like today, where people, I had a conversation with a friend and colleague yesterday who said America's over. We're done. I'm not going to see it. He's an older gentleman, and he was saying he was so depressed because he just
Would you
thought,
believe that I have 100 friends like that? I mean, real people in my real life.
yeah, I'm just using it as an example. Like, you can't talk
But it's
to,
not an unusual example. There are a ton of people that are stressed out.
yeah, and they believe that America is finished, and that is how people felt in the 1970s. And Reagan might have bought America another 50 years.
Yeah,
you know,
I agree with that. That's kind of nice. So I think
um,
we lost track, though. It is number. You don't even know what number you're on as far as important presidential elections. Is it 7, 8, 9? Where are we at?
oh, I don't know. We're probably around 8 or 10. I don't
Right.
know.
And
But
so,
go
so
ahead.
what is the human condition, though? That you and I voted differently in the presidential election, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, and we're friends.
Yeah.
Why do I know hundreds of people, and basically it's let's say 100 people on the left, they're not left, 100 people that voted for Harris, and 50 people that are voted for Trump, and both of those 150 people think that if Trump doesn't win or Harris doesn't win, our country's basically over. We've gone fascist or we've gone socialist or communist, they say, but I don't think they actually mean it. They just say it. How come everybody's so upset right now? What is our human psyche of why we're so scared about this election?
Well, I think it goes back to something that we said in the last episode, which is that um, people who are voting for Harris are imagining the worst of what Trump could potentially do. And people who are voting for Trump are imagining and hoping for the best of what Trump could do. But it's the presence of someone who is so incredibly unpredictable, combined with, I would say, the cynicism of the Democratic Party in how they've chosen to deal with Trump, um, which is, the thing it sort of reminds me of is how they talk about climate change. And I know this is going to sound like a crazy example, but somebody will get in your face and get very angry with you about climate change and say it's an existential threat and we have to deal with it right now. And I'll say, okay, so let's build some nuclear power plants. And we'll say, no, we need to cut and conserve. And you're just like, well, you don't really think it's an existential threat then. If you thought it was an existential threat and you thought that it was something we had to deal with immediately, you would prioritize doing the thing that would solve this problem. But you won't do that. And so
So, what did Democrats do with Trump?
so they do the same thing. I would say, like, the Democratic Party funded a bunch of pro-Trump candidates because they wanted people who they thought were easier to defeat. And they're running ads against my friend, the Congressman David Valadao, trying to depress his vote among Trump supporters, in essence, attacking him for not supporting Donald Trump. And it's being funded by the Democratic Party, which means that if they really thought that Trump was such a threat, then Kamala Harris wouldn't be the nominee. They would have chosen somebody, the person most capable of defeating Donald Trump, but they didn't do that. They chose a weak candidate who was
Pretty
going
good
to have,
campaign, though, hasn't she?
pardon?
She's run a pretty good campaign, surprisingly, though, hasn't she?
I don't know if she has run a good
Right.
campaign.
Yeah.
A professional campaign has been run on her behalf with giant piles of money. I mean, but I don't know that she deserves any particular credit for it.
Fair enough.
Because, and so when
Who
people,
would the Democrats have chosen
pardon?
if the Democrats really thought that Trump was going to be Hitler? Who would they have chosen? I mean, you're being pretty authoritative on your prognostication, so I'm curious if you have an answer. You may not, but
Yeah, I mean, Josh Shapiro.
it's president, not vice president.
Yeah, president. Who else would it? I guess I'd go with you could have gone with a sort of unity ticket of some kind where you put you know uh, Liz Cheney as the VP or Mitt Romney as the vice presidential choice or something like that. And I mean, if it was a moderate campaign with Shapiro and Romney as the unity ticket, they would be winning by 30 points.
You think it would be that much?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
one of my posts I'm going to make in the next couple of weeks is that where is the supermajority candidate? Why can't we have an office holder that gets 65 or 70%?
Well,
Why
we can. The problem is I was just thinking about is that um, one of the problems is that the Trump and Obama eras have kind of deprived us of a bench of unity candidates. Because, I mean, I just pulled Shapiro out because there's almost no path to victory that doesn't involve Pennsylvania. And you would just say that if you chose somebody who could win Pennsylvania, and winning Pennsylvania could just mean someone who was a better campaigner and governor of Pennsylvania, because if he could win Pennsylvania, if he was 5 points ahead in the polls in Pennsylvania, that it would so depress the Republican vote that because in order for Trump to win, he has to rely on low propensity voters and the enthusiasm of his of that sort of working class um, working class people who have to get motivated, who don't vote in off year elections. And if the message was, "Oh, Trump's going to lose," then they wouldn't bother to fill out their ballots. They're the first people to get discouraged if it seems like they are backing a losing candidate. So, if it was a Shapiro headed ticket, and he was up by 5 points, they would all say, "Oh, what's the point? It's all rigged," and they wouldn't vote. And
I know this is third rail stuff, so I should be careful. I shouldn't even ask it in this way, but I want to get to the conclusion. Shapiro wasn't chosen because of the hard left in the Democratic Party and or Israeli Gaza thing or something else.
oh, I think it's probably the appearance of passing over the
Yeah,
black
yeah,
female
yeah.
vice
That
president and how that would look. Um,
even at the risk of losing, you're saying they have to make that appearance.
yeah, and if appearing to do that is more important than defeating Donald Trump, then maybe you don't think Donald Trump is the next Hitler because you think you can do it without. Um,
And clearly, you don't think Trump is that much of a threat because you voted for some other person or left it
I
blank.
don't know if I would do that in a battleground state. The reason why I the the stakes are lower here
Sure.
is that I live in California, and um, I was trying to send a signal to both parties. Both parties, when this election is over, will analyze um, the vote, and even though it will be anonymous, they will see that a registered Republican who turned in a ballot and voted on everything did not vote for president. And that sends a signal to both parties that I was a gettable voter who neither party managed to get.
I have about 30 friends in real life that did exactly that same thing that you did. I mean, they're real
Yeah.
friends, and they just couldn't stomach voting for Harris like I did, so they wrote in or left it blank
I think if I lived in a battleground state, I I might have voted.
for
Um,
Harris.
I don't know. That's a tough bubble to fill in. Um,
Yeah, read Bill Kristol's comments on this, though. I wanted to see it
I
because I
know, and I found there have been a series of podcasts on the Dispatch lately where they brought in uh, people to make the best case for each of these options, and um, I do think that and I guess this is my best argument for voting for Harris is that um, you should opt for predictability. And she is
was
the more
on stuff that's so important on the first two or three that you talked about, presidential most important elections, peaceful transfer of power. I mean, it's important stuff.
right. And even if you disagree with what the predictable thing that she would do, that the fact that she would be predictable is probably good.
Yeah. See,
Um,
thanks for justifying my vote. Let me interrupt ourselves and talk about three or four different things, and then open it up to questions. So, depending on what happens, the mood of I think Americans have this like winner take all philosophy that if just Harris wins by 5,000 votes in this state and 10,000 votes in that state, then all will be good in the land. We saved our America from Trump and maybe even Trumpism. Thank
right.
God we saved America again, or and vice versa. And I kind of
Yep.
have a different perspective on that. It there's still a 47% of the country that disagrees with the 53% of the country, minus the people that didn't vote or voted for some third party candidate, etc. What's your perspective on this election? Next Wednesday, we're going to wake up and go, what?
Yeah, I mean, we're human beings, so we can't help it. We're going to do it too. We can't help but overdraw too many conclusions from uh, something that is essentially a coin flip. It's the human brain can't help itself. We see two dots in a line and we see it as a face. We turn fragments of information into a story,
Okay.
and thus we should just assume that as human beings we're going to do the same thing.
What were the biggest landslide elections? And you can be wrong on this. We could just, I guess,
Well,
Jake.
I have a slightly different metric than other people, so I tend to first um, look at who got the most votes at the time when the most people were voting. And once you factor those things in, the biggest landslides were in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, essentially before the progressive era. So,
Okay.
by that standard, the most popular president in American history is probably William McKinley. That and you if you factor in that black people were not allowed to vote, and assuming that they would have been voting Republican, the people the most if black people had been allowed to vote, those Republican presidents like Rutherford B. Hayes and who won in a contested election, it shouldn't have been contested. I mean, he should have won that election overwhelmingly. But Grant, Hayes, these were essentially those should have been Republican landslides. Um, it, so once you get into the era of um, not having to project the black vote because black voters could actually vote um, in large numbers, I should say, because black people did vote during Reconstruction. It was just their voting was suppressed. So you have to sort of say the first really completely free election that took place was either 68 or 72. Um, and
1968 or 1972?
yeah, 1968 or 1972, where,
For both of my lifetime, Professor. Really?
well,
Just
yeah,
because black
because
people.
even though the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act had passed in 64 and 65, there was still a lot of court cases and hangovers and county offices who were dragging their feet in 68. So, it really isn't until 72. So you'd say like the big, I mean, the big landslide was for Nixon in 72. That was massive. Reagan 84 was also huge.
Okay, I've got to get us back on the questions I was having, but one more on that line. Is America a better place when we're more united like that than in 72 and 80, or is it good that we're divided and we apparently hate half the country? I mean, is it as bad as we think it is, or is there a virtue to the disagreement?
I just don't, I don't know if you can interpret from those results um, a sort of national unity. I was going to say the other big landslide was Herbert Hoover in 1928. Uh, so, so and also remember that Nixon won in a massive landslide in 1972, and he was out of office by 74. 2 years later. So um, Nixon winning in a landslide in 72 did not imply national unity in 1972. It was in many ways a troubled
Yeah,
time.
well,
Um, and but I tend to think that national unity um, comes during times of crisis when the values of the United States are seen in relief. You know, when there's some sort of international crisis that really outlines what is distinctive about the United States, and when those kinds of things happen, the United States tends to be um, unified.
Okay,
But
so that's one of
we
four things.
lose perspective during any time of peace and prosperity.
Nice. So that's one of four things I want to talk about and get you, because we may disagree on this. So I always like it when we differ. Um, One of the reasons I voted for Harris is because of standing up to Putin and Russia and supporting Ukraine and NATO. I think Harris will do that. I think Trump won't. And I think we'll go into a crisis of expansionist Russia for the next decade or 2 decades, that they will take some other little country, and the next thing we're in a world war, us and Europe against God, Korea apparently, and Iran and Russia on the other side. We're going to be in a world war. I don't think Trump is just going to give a part of Ukraine away and then everything's going to be nice and settled for years and peace and prosperity throughout the world. I think it's the opposite. I think it's really important that Harris wins because of that. Now, I'm not sure. Maybe you agree or disagree. Talk to us about what's going to happen after this election and use foreign policy as an example. I gave you my perspective. Just talk historically. John, you're a nut, or
No, I
yeah.
think that's right, and I would say that it is important that Ukraine not, be partitioned as part of a peace agreement. I think it's important that Russia loses this war, and it is demonstrable that they lose the war. Um, and I think it is more likely that that happens under a Harris administration. But I
This is
would
an
also,
example, Professor. This is an example where philosophies have flipped. The Republican and Democratic parties have completely flipped in the last 5 years over this kind of issue, right? Historically, I could go to a county assembly or a state assembly in Colorado, and 100% of us would be for Ukraine. I mean, it would be no ifs, ands, or buts. And it has flipped. I have real friends that have switched their position, and I'm confused. So what's going on?
the confirmation bias. They begin with the assumption that they support Trump, and whatever Trump says, they're looking for a way to agree with it.
But these are
And
really smart people. They're not dumb. I mean, I have all my friends are smart. I have a good collection of friends, and
yeah, but
they,
they're still human beings. I mean, the confirmation bias is the most powerful bias that human beings have. So you don't get to stop being human just because
well, how
you.
do you know that you and I don't have the confirmation bias and they're right?
Well, I think because neither one of us are Trump supporters. We have different biases, but so it's easy. In a way, I'm because I'm not a supporter of Harris or Trump. It is interesting. I wonder how if I'm seeing things that I didn't see before. I'm sure I am, because I am not invested in defending either of these candidates. Because
I
up
know
until
when
2016,
I
I did
dropped
it.
when I dropped my party affiliation 10 years ago, I noticed it. I would generally support Republican just up and down the ticket. I'd pretend that I'd study everything and think through everything, but no, I just generally support the ticket. And then for the last 10 years, I've had to think through every issue, and I'm really surprised that often when I think through it, I go, I don't know if I like my former position. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, as up until 2016, I was a member of the Central Committee, so my job was to explain the position of the Republican Party. It was my main job, given my background,
Right.
and so of course, if that's what I tried to always be intellectually honest, but I understood that I was putting information into a framework
In the
that.
best possible light. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. When I was engaged in partisan politics, that is.
Okay. Well, so on foreign policy, anything on Israel, Gaza, or just Ukraine's good enough? Like, what's going to happen after this election?
Well, I guess I'm always interested in China as well, and I um, I'm I never want to leave them off the list in terms of who's going to have a more coherent policy to
Well, what's your guess?
counter
If we wake
China
up
over the
Wednesday
long
and
term.
it's Harris, or if we wake up Wednesday and it's Trump, what's your guess on China? What?
That's the thing is I haven't seen anything coherent out of either camp. I mean, one of them is smart sounding nonsense and the other one is literal nonsense. So
Okay. That
Harris.
gets that gets to my next issue, and I've got two more after that, and we got to make this quick. So I want to see if Rick or Dave, Bart have any questions. Um, Deficit and debt. Both candidates are just gonna just suck at this. I don't know why anyone in America is not talking about this anymore. No one seems to care. No one. And it is just gone, it's just gone like this. I've been involved in this for 20 years. And about 10 years ago, 8 years ago, even the no debt coalition seemed to go away, and now we're for better government coalition. I just talk to me about how come we don't care about our deficit and debt.
Because it has not yet created the crisis.
But is this? It's so clear that it's going to be a crisis, is it
Yeah.
not?
Yes, but until it causes the crash, it until it makes the economy collapse, um, people are not going to care about the debt.
Humans
It
are
is,
this dumb that we can see the crash coming. We know it's going to be horrible, but we just are going to try to eke out whatever why we can.
yeah.
Huh. Well, that's depressing. Okay.
And it's like a game of hot potato, that you just know that whoever happens to be president when it finally rears its head is going to be blamed for it.
Wow, that's depressing. We mostly agree on abortion, but we have some differences. I really think here's a difference. I really think much of this election is about abortion. If you're pro life, you're voting for Trump. If you're pro choice, you're voting for Harris. You and I both agree that there's a lot more nuances to all this, and most people have a nuanced position on abortion. But it's a binary election and they're making a choice. I think a lot of this stuff that we pretend it's not, but I pay attention to my friends. And then when you listen and you talk, and all of a sudden it comes out and goes, yeah, but you're going to support abortion on demand till whatever. I mean, it comes out. People are really angry and nervous about abortion. Agree or disagree?
Agree, but remember, you only get to vote once.
Right.
So that's, all of that has already been factored in. They're not the ones who are deciding this election.
You mean everybody that's pro choice is voting for Harris, and everybody that's voting for pro life is voting for Trump. And the people that are nuanced on this issue kind of have a decision one way or the other anyway, and they go that way.
Yeah, but I would also say you're talking about a voter who has thought about this is probably a pretty consistent voter, and that's not who's going to decide this election.
Hmm.
This election is going to be decided by a bunch of people who do not follow politics at all,
At all. But they're
have
finally.
never thought about any of this, and they're going to stare at the ballot, and something is going to make them fill it out and send it in, and it's going to be some sort of gut feeling.
And by the way, we're going to be able to prove whether you are right or not on that. And the reason for it is because of all the undervotes in all the other offices. If there's a huge amount of undervoting in the lower offices, then you're right. If there's not a huge amount of undervoting in those offices they've never heard of, then you're wrong. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, but people will still sometimes fill out the ballot and vote for the incumbent. So you'll,
They know
uh,
they're the incumbent. They
yeah,
probably
but
know they.
yeah, or I mean, people, one of the depressing things I remember when I was breaking down vote ballots at the local level was we had this one candidate, um, because our congressman at the time was Devin Nunes,
Mhm.
and there was a guy running for office whose first name was Devin, and he won the assembly race. He ended up getting the nomination because people didn't remember which Devin they were supposed to vote for, and
Yeah.
so they just voted for both Devins. And how many people did that? A few hundred. And admitted later, like, I just couldn't remember which Devon I was supposed to vote for, so I just voted for both Devons. And another, and that's when things like racism of names will pop up. It was like we also found out that, like, people didn't vote for the establishment candidate because he was Mexican. And you're like, yeah, it wasn't very many, but it was 150, and they just voted based on one of a, they voted, they were like, oh, well, the guy I'm supposed to vote for probably isn't the Mexican, and so just straight up racism based on names. And that's what low information voters do. So if you're looking for like some kind of rhyme or like, leave aside any of assumptions you have about what how these people process information.
Interesting. Okay, and I would have never thought of that. So that's really insightful for me. Thank you. Let me give two more, and then we're done. We'll open it up. All the other social issues combined, whether it's gays or trans or what they're teaching in school or book burning or book banning or all the other issues combined, important or not, and is there going to be
Yeah, that's the stuff that low information voters vote on.
Okay.
That's why this garbage story from last week might end up mattering, because these are the kinds of people who this is going to be the only thing they know about. Joe Biden called us garbage. And, you know, F him. I'm voting for Trump just because they called us garbage, and I'm not garbage, right? And that's it. that might swing a few thousand votes per precinct, which tips it into a Trump winning by 4 to 12,000 votes in 5 states and eking out a victory pretty close to the one he won last time.
So it's interesting, though. That's an interesting point, but you discounted all the other social issues like book burning, banning, and trans issues, and bathroom sports, guys and women's sports, all that stuff. Those aren't necessarily
Well,
non issues.
those are the if you think about it, like, those are the what goes into the basket, and then something tips the scale that
Okay.
says, so they've sort of already got the, like, I'm the trans stuff, and um, you know women sports and going up against men, and they say, but I'm not going to bother with this. And then the one last thing comes in that says that's, in other words, the identity was created by those issues, and
Right.
then something comes in to tip the scale and leads
Okay.
this low propensity voter to vote.
Okay. You're being persuasive. Thanks. Last one. Economy overall. President has enormous responsibility over the economy, right? They make the GDP. We either start working more harder or less harder based off who's president, or are we misleading ourselves on the power of the presidency?
It's like a lot of things in the government. Government can create the preconditions for success. They can't actually create the success. So, in a way, the government can hurt the economy, but the government can't help the economy. The way the government helps the economy is by not hurting it. So, if President Biden had not passed that massive spending bill and the economy had recovered somewhat naturally, and maybe he would be getting more credit because you'd have a recovery that without where inflation came down quicker, to where it didn't settle at the high rate that it is now. So, in the sense that he is responsible for doing that, he is the one who created the conditions that are making it tougher for Kamala Harris. But that being said, people who point out that the economy of the United States is good are telling the truth. But
And comparatively against other
yeah,
countries.
compared to other countries and compared to other times in our history. But when you discount but you have to somehow say that without discounting the distortions that all of that inflation inserted into our economy.
And also, isn't it also possible? I'm not even advocating this. It's just possible. I'm saying that if it wasn't for all that excess government spending, then maybe the economy wanted to done as well. That we'd actually be in a recession or a depression.
I know, I don't believe that at all. I, I mean, you have to create. I mean, there's going to be some sort of correction, but typically, that's going to be over in a few quarters. And if you do it without all that excess spending, um, it would certainly uh, have not had this after effect. I mean, the United States of America was flooded with cash during COVID, and then just
You mean
that
federal government
plan.
spending flooded with cash?
Pardon?
You mean federal government spending flooded with cash?
No, it flooded the economy of the United States with cash twice. First with COVID, and then with that Biden spending bill.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean,
We're saying the
and
same.
that money has to go somewhere. Uh, and and of course, everybody likes it when they're getting it. But the effect that it had on the economy was, we get this sort of double whammy of inflation that doesn't go away. Um, and of course, wages never keep pace with inflation that way. It just
Okay. If Trump wins on Wednesday, you're a little sad or pissed, or now you're fine. We'll do it. Or if Harris wins, you'll be a little nervous about some of her policies, but it will be okay. Are you freaking out one way or the other? Do you care? I know you care, but
I care, but I also one of the having lived through the last Trump presidency, I I found myself repeating this great old Midwestern expression that I learned in Ohio. Don't borrow trouble. You know, I'm not going to be pre-worried about things. I'm going to be prepared to worry about real things as they appear.
that's nice.
But I don't want to ruin my life being worried about things until they happen.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I think I can't believe people have really genuinely forgotten this, but President Trump in office is a daily clown show. I went back to because and Jake can look this up. One of the things the UC Santa Barbara Center for the Presidency has this website, and they have presidential documents that they use, and on it they have a timeline of the Trump presidency, and you just look at that timeline and you realize that you've forgotten thousands of insane things that he did when he was president. That every single day you would open up the newspaper and it would be another crazy thing. And we've forgotten almost all of them. And if you look up that timeline, Jake, I bet any one of these panelists who I'm staring at right now, if you look at that list, you'll just say, "Oh, I completely forgot about this. I completely forgot about that," because it was every single day, and even that was not capturing what was actually happening in our government. I'll never forget, from my friends who work in the United States government, the stories that they would tell me, especially the ones who were overseas, were essentially left without any guidance for 4 years. I mean, nobody was in charge. And you think, oh, well, who cares? And you're like, well, this person is in charge of negotiating trade deals in Central Asia. And nobody was ever appointed to be the boss. And they didn't even figure out that someone was there doing that job already and needed a boss, and then all of a sudden 4 years have passed and you realize, like, I guess I guess this is what happened. Oh, you found it, Jake? Yeah.
Fact.
Jake's got something. Yeah, go ahead.
And I agree.
So, so on that timeline, just pulling it up to the start, his second day as president on January 21st, he gave remarks at CIA headquarters and he complained about media coverage of the size of his inauguration crowd, saying that it's bigger than the media was reporting. And then he said, "Trust me, I'm like a smart person." And that's his second day on the job, and he's already complaining about how the media is treating him unfairly.
Yeah,
I'd completely forgotten about that.
at the
Yeah,
CIA.
that's his speech to the CIA. It's like, yeah, you're right. I forgot. But you can do that. Look up day 320 in year two or something, and you will find something else that you completely forgot about. Like it's a daily clown show.
And so
That
that's okay to have the most powerful nation in the history of the world to have a daily clown show as our chief executive. It's okay.
um, no, it's not okay. It is completely absurd.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from because I wanted relish looking forward to it. I do have a friend though. I have a two-star general that was one of those 171 generals that spoke against Trump. He's truly worried. He thinks he could be recalled and court-martialed and sent to Guantanamo or something. He's a rational man. He's not a paranoid person. It's a real friend in my real life, a retired
Yeah,
two-star general
no,
who's
and this is why he's not completely irrational. Because if Joe Biden could do what he did with student loans, which is essentially wake up every single day and try to figure out how to break the law in order to forgive student loans
yeah,
and get away with it, Donald Trump can do the same thing with one of these pet issues.
yeah.
And he could wake up every single day and say, find a way to court
Get
martial these generals.
Yeah, to get Liz Cheney
And
and go down the list. Yeah.
yep. I mean,
And
you don't know. I mean, one of the things that I kept telling people was stop trying to predict what Donald Trump will do next
so,
because
so
it's an
President,
impossible
do you
task.
think I am naive? And admittedly, I have a law degree, but so what? But my constitutional law background, which is a couple courses in law school, says that ain't going to happen. The general's pretty safe. Freedom of speech, highest protected speech is political. He's a retired general, and there would be enough people sworn to uphold the Constitution in the Judge Advocate General Corps and the military tribunals that wouldn't be doing that. They just say no. There'd be resign, 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 and pretty soon the president's not going to get his way. Do you think I'm naive?
Uh, you're not naive. I would say two things. First of all, what happened last time might be what happens this time, which is that you just keep resigning until the people who don't say no are too incompetent to fill out the paperwork. And but the other piece of it is that you don't have to get sent to prison to Guantanamo in order to have your life ruined.
Yeah, and that's what he's worried about, going broke defending him.
Trying to defend yourself from this kind of thing. And
Yeah,
you
that's
just don't want that spotlight landing on you.
right.
I mean, it's no different than like what Twitter mobs used to do,
Right.
where when I think the greatest thing that Elon Musk did was buy, well, maybe not the greatest thing, but like him buying Twitter ended the Twitter mob. Now there's no media source that can direct hate to ruin people's lives
Interesting.
like there was before.
Interesting. All right, I've got way too long.
Yeah.
Dave, this is the first time you've ever joined us. I think you have a remarkable mind in public policy and civic engagement. You don't have to put yourself on video and take yourself off mute, but I want to at least honor you if you have a question. It can be anything we've talked about or something new. Dave Coleman.
I appreciate that. That's fascinating. I was happy to be here for the first time. I guess one question I have, and you touched on it a little bit in your last class. I mean, your last question, and it was the how the people are reacting. They're worried, and John's example about his friend And I see a lot of this. I just talked to a friend of mine today who's actually looking at options to leave the country and learn Spanish. So it's on that side if Trump would win. And then also I see people on the other side that say, "Hey, I'm a straight white male. Harris is gonna not enslave me or whatever the words are. That I'm not going to get anything from her. I'm going to struggle to find a job. Blah blah blah." So there's a lot of worry. Have you seen this in to anywhere near this level in previous elections? Is this something that's new? Is it just escalated, or have you seen this before in the 1980 election or one of these other elections that you've seen? Or are we in new territory here?
It's not great question. No, it's not new. I mean, every election is the most important election we've ever had. I think it's almost easier to point out the elections where that didn't take place. you know, um, Bob Dole versus Bill Clinton. People weren't making the argument that, I mean, I guess they were, but they were only half-heartedly making the argument that this is the most important election of our lifetimes, that sort of thing. What else? I'm trying to think of another election where people, well, the best example of that not happening was in the 1950s, where Adlai Stevenson wasn't even convinced that he needed to run against Dwight Eisenhower. He joked privately, "I can't believe I somehow have to convince America that they need to be scared of Eisenhower." Like he knew that he had no chance of winning either time. But other than those examples, people have felt like this in every election. I was thinking about this actually because all this fascism talk really reminds me of Harry Truman in 48. We kind of forget how unhinged he became. That sort of give him hell Harry stuff. Like if you go back and read his speeches, he was completely out of his mind. He was charging the Republican parties and Tom Dewey with being essentially Nazis, and that they were going to establish a Nazi style police state. And he was telling crowd after crowd that Dewey was a Nazi. and he was telling groups of immigrants who had fled from communism, and fled from Hitler, that the Republican Party was, the party of communism and Hitler, and totalitarianism. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Eisenhower felt like he had to run, because he couldn't believe that won, that such a good guy like Dewey could be caricatured that way. And then, of course, the other one, the Lyndon Johnson race, where, I mean, he ended up winning in a landslide, but in your heart, he's right, and in your guts, he's nuts. Like, I mean, there was a tremendous amount of vile and the use of advertising in 64. I mean, most people remember the Daisy ad where Lyndon Johnson was basically saying, if you don't vote for me, we're going to have a nuclear holocaust. But I remember the third grade. I use this example in my classes. My third grade teacher rolled out that video cart and showed us a video clip from the movie The Day After Tomorrow, where the horses get vaporized in the nuclear attack.
I think that happened to me too.
And she told us, this is what Ronnie Reagan wants to do to us. I was 10. And that's what my teacher was telling me was going to happen if Ronald Reagan won the election in 1984. So, I mean, I remember my best friend when we were in college. It was the election of 1992, and he had a T-shirt that had George H.W. Bush on it, and it was half of Bush's face and half of Hitler's face. I mean, the idea that George H.W. Bush was Hitler, it is laughable, but you know, my friend wore the t-shirt in 1992. So it happens in almost every election cycle.
Human nature or American nature, huh?
Human nature, but you know, tribalism, you know, you could call it that. But I would say this election is different in that it's absurd to say that George H.W. Bush was a Hitler in waiting. It's not absurd to say that Donald Trump is at best indifferent to rule of law. So, you know,
But
even
still,
paranoid, you know, it's okay to be a little paranoid.
I know, but you still didn't vote against him, so you don't mean what you say. If you mean what you say, you'd vote against him.
I mean, I would have voted again. I want to emphasize that I live in a state where Harris is up. Jake, look, pull it up. What's Harris up in California right now?
I heard Trump said he could win California.
Is it 30 but I mean, did they ever poll it? And 30, 40%?
I know. I'm being unfair to you.
Yeah.
Jake, I know you have to get back to your students, I think. Do you have a quick question before you depart?
Yeah, 25%. He's
Oh, I've got more time. I'm on my prep period for like the next 30
Since I've already
minutes.
interrupted, why don't you see if you have any questions or comments? Anything?
He's
You're-
asking if there be questions.
I'll come back to me.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Bart, do you want to jump in?
Okay, just had to unmute myself. Sorry about that.
Please tell us about legal analysis. Are we going to have a decision on Tuesday night, Wednesday, or a month, or by December 11th, or whatever it is?
No, I don't think we're going to actually know who wins the presidential election on Tuesday night unless the current polling is really, really off. I think if the polling is right and it's actually as close as it is, I think we're going to have several days before we actually get a conclusive answer, because some of the states, and I guess this gets into the legal stuff, some of the states like Wisconsin in particular and Pennsylvania have slowed down their ability to count votes as quickly as they did last time. And I don't know what the effect of that is going to be. I think it, you know, and this is just my own personal opinion, I think it's absolutely amazing that some of these states seem to think that it's better not to count votes that people have already cast. It's just weird, you know, until election day. You know, in Pennsylvania, they're not going to count mail ballots and absentee ballots until that night. It's like, are you nuts? You know, you're talking about millions of pieces of paper. Why are you not doing it the way we do it here in Colorado? But whatever, you know, but I think those things are going to slow it down. I think there will also be a lot of lawsuits filed by both sides. I don't think it's going to be one side in particular, although it's going to be it'll primarily be the side that's losing, whichever side that is. But they're both raring to go. They've got hundreds of lawyers, you know, basically on the starting line. So I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, am I nervous about this election? Yeah. I'm nervous about it for the same reasons you guys have been talking about, you know, for the last hour. I think regardless of the outcome, there's going to be some violence somewhere, physical violence, because people are just that hopped up right now. And it's not just going to be on the right. I mean, there are people on the left who are that way. So I don't know, you know, I really don't know.
Let me interrupt you on the violence thing. Professor Tootle, you 6 months ago during one of our conversations, you suggested that there probably won't be a lot of violence because we're lazy. I have now determined that I think you're right. I think if there would have been major violence coming up, I think we would have seen signs and symptoms of it already. There'd be people out fighting in the street corners or something. I don't think there's going to be violence, except maybe some weirdo, isolated weirdos. What do you think, Professor, on violence?
Yeah, and also the decentralized nature of our elections process means that if you are prone to violence, you don't quite know where to go. You know, there's no single high value target to go after. And the fact that we do have absentee ballots that already have been mailed out and have been collected. I mean, I don't remember. I voted 2 or 3 weeks ago, you know, and I got a text message saying my ballot had already been counted 2 or 3 weeks ago, you know. But I will say that there's one possibility that Bart didn't mention. I agree with everything Bart said, but that is that Georgia is quick with their getting their elections returns in, and I'm going to be looking for how Georgia's election returns compare with the last available polls in Georgia. If if you just want to know early in the evening, this is my little tip for those of you so look at the first election returns from Georgia and compare that to where the polls are. And if it says that, Trump wins Georgia by 3 percentage points, then what you can assume is that Trump voters are being underpolled by about 3%. And if Harris wins by 2 percentage points, then that means that we've overcorrected from the last election cycle, because essentially everybody's trying to guess how to poll and weight those unpredictable low propensity voters. And we might have a clue as to the way things are going early in the evening if you compare those, the actual election results in Georgia to how national polls were weighted.
So, Professor, and for Dave, I have this theory. So tell me where I'm wrong on this. And Dave is a numbers guy. He loves doing this kind of stuff. So that's why I'm throwing him in for this one. That I'm going to take the 2016 and 2020 presidential elections in Colorado and see how, because we announced, I mean, there's 2 million people already voted in Colorado, and it will be announced like at 7:20 in Colorado what all those mail-in ballots, every single citizen in Colorado gets a mail-in ballot to them. We'll have a pretty good insight on what Colorado voted compared to 4 years ago and 8 years ago. And I think because of the standardization of media and social media and restaurants and entertainment and tourist sites, I think that the American voter in Colorado, percentage-wise, can be translated to many other states. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I mean, it's not quite a bellwether state. Colorado is...
But a suburban guy, me, and Colorado is pretty similar to a suburban guy in a lot of other places across the country.
Yeah, but I mean, you guys need a little more Colorado exceptionalism. There really is something to the Mountain West that is a little bit different than the rest of the country.
Okay.
I mean, I in fact, I use the example, Bart is wearing a vest right now, and I was talking about the weather in various parts of the world where I lived, and I said, Colorado is the only place where wearing a vest makes sense, because that's the only place where it gets cold in that particular way. It doesn't get cold the way it gets cold in Ohio or Georgia or Visalia. You never wear a vest.
Yeah.
But only in Colorado does it make sense to wear a vest.
And short.
Yeah, and right. It's a different. It is different. The Mountain West is different.
Okay, I'll accept that critique. Dave, do you have any comments or insights on how you're going to evaluate election night results?
Yeah, I mean, I think comparing them to these other elections, especially 2020, I think the turnout's going to be somewhere between 2016 and 2020, just to be honest. Between those two numbers, I think we could. I agree that there's differences here than some of these states, these battleground states for sure. But I think we can glean some numbers into it once those results come in Colorado. And like you say, we'll know pretty soon. But is Trump doing as better than he did in 2020 and 2016? I know he did better here in 2016 and 2020. Obviously, he still lost both years. But I think we could glean into something like, is he doing better here? And same thing with Georgia, because Georgia is going to be an early state also. I think you could start to say, yeah, there is a little bit of a movement, that men are showing up more or women are showing up more. So I am looking forward to seeing the results in Colorado, and I think that can help determine, is one candidate in trouble or not.
Yeah.
I mean, the nightmare scenario for me is that we're looking at Georgia and somebody wins Georgia by like 10,000 votes, and then it's just all bets are off. It's chaos for the next few months. It's
Agreed.
I mean, if it's gonna come down to a few thousand
Legal
votes
chaos, you think,
in
not
12
societal
states.
unrest chaos.
Pardon?
Legal chaos, not societal unrest chaos.
No, yeah, legal chaos,
I agree.
with whoever wins, or I'm sorry, with whoever loses claiming that they really won.
Yeah. And that's going to happen. We know Trump won already. So yeah, everything. He won
Well,
everything. Yeah.
that's
Okay.
why you want there to be a like 3 to 5% margin in those battleground states. You don't want it to be within a few thousand votes.
Okay. Before we declare victory for today, I want to
Oh,
ask if we're able to
hold on,
meet.
got a question. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll have a couple more questions, but I just want to start to wrap up before we declare victory. Can we meet next Friday and see how wrong you are on all this?
Of course.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll do a post-election thing too. So just keep that in mind. So for the record, I think it's going to be. I'm agreeing with your friend, your Democratic professor friend, that Harris is going to win this, and it's going to be pretty big. Could even be a landslide, and we're going to know Tuesday night. So how's that for public ridicule? I'm putting myself out to the world. 7 billion people can see what an idiot John Brackney is, because I think we're going to know Tuesday night, and it's going to be Harris. Okay, other questions or comments, and then we're going to finish up. Jake.
Well, Rick had it.
Oh, Rick, sorry, you're not on my screen. So sorry, Rick, for being rude. There you are. Rick, what's your question or comment?
I've got a comment, and then I do have a question. So my comment is, I do think that the election is not about policy or good governance. It's all about winning. And that the parties have got really, really good at figuring out how to spin voters up. And exactly who's going to vote and what your hot buttons are, or who's not going to vote, and right down to individual households. And that this is about trying to win as opposed to any sort of policy or inflation or Ukraine or any other issue. It's about winning. So my question, though, and again, it's be interested in your perspectives on that cynical view. But my question is that the Supreme Court really gave the president a lot of ability to break the law and do nefarious actions in order to get an election outcome that is desired. Does that provide a roadmap for the Biden administration to do one better than what Trump tried? If Trump were to win the electoral college, is there a pathway, and do you think the Democrats would take it to interfere with the certification of a Republican victory in order to, again, if the only goal is to win, it doesn't matter if you play by the rules. Do you think it's at all likely or possible that the Biden administration would overthrow a Trump win at the ballot box?
I mean, no, I don't think so. Joe Biden has a sense of where he wants to be in American history, and he would never want to go down in history as the person who interfered with the peaceful transition of power. And Kamala Harris probably wrongly believes that she has a political future. I mean, she has no political future if she doesn't win this election. Nobody's going to say, well, let's put her up again. And I don't know that. I mean, I really don't know what she would do, but but I think she believes that she has a political future, and she wouldn't do that either. I don't know of any people in the Democratic Party, especially in leadership, who would do something like that.
I don't know anyone in the Republican Party except for Trump that would do it.
Oh, I think I mean,
Name names.
there's some, yeah, Marjorie Taylor Greene would do it.
Oh,
you
well,
know.
yeah, but I'm talking
What's her
credible.
name? Carrie Lake would do it.
Credible,
Yeah,
Professor.
yeah. But you would hope that anyone who's not a complete backbencher,
Right.
yeah. But Jim Jordan's not exactly a backbencher, and he might do it.
Might do it. Okay, touche. Jim
Yeah.
Jordan is a good one. Yeah, all right, I'll give you that.
So anyway,
Practically
I think
speaking,
that's unlikely.
practically speaking, though, the same, not demographics is the wrong word, but the control of the states by Republicans. It would be harder for Biden to do it, even if he wanted to do it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's another thing, is to remember that the elections are 50 state elections, and you would have to control the state machinery. If you couldn't interfere with the electoral count, you'd have to interfere with the state machinery, which is very difficult. I mean, under existing court precedent, I just don't know. I mean, the courts have been pretty consistent on saying we got hard deadlines here, and whatever, you got to return the election returns before these dates. And
they've also been consistent on the sanctity of the individual voter. Even what the laws changed and it was wrong or whatever, but a voter cast a vote and that should be counted. The courts have been very consistent about not overturning the will of voters.
Yeah, but if there's a problem, that problem needs to be reconciled before a specific date, and the challenge has to come in before a specific date. And if it's not dealt with, then you've got to go with the returns you have. I'm pretty sure the courts will be able to dispose of all these things in time to meet these deadlines. I'm cautiously optimistic, I would say.
Does that answer your question, Rick, or you want to follow up?
Each election seems to be getting a little bit weirder.
Yeah.
And, Harris would have to be, as vice president, would be the one certifying the vote. If there is enough chaos and confusion caused to delay counts, certifications, and we get to January 6th, and the courts have not resolved the issue, if we even have one state that's open, I do worry that it creates an opportunity for mischief. And I guess I'm less confident than you are, Professor, that people of goodwill and would allow their better angels to take flight and do the right thing. Pence did it last time. He should, whatever the highest civilian award that you can give a person, he should have gotten it by this point.
Yeah.
It's a shame he's not better recognized, but I hope you're right. I hope whatever delays that Bart may have expected and are fully resolved, and votes are counted and cases are settled. But if they're not, I do worry that the Supreme Court gave an opening to who's ever president to have, tilt the scale in a way that wouldn't sit well with the American public afterwards.
Bart, do you have a legal answer on that court decision giving so much power to official acts of the president?
Yeah, that decision is probably not going to stand for very long. I think the Chief Justice cobbled together a majority in that case, but I think they're going to very quickly figure out that the reasoning of that decision just doesn't work. And I don't think I agree with what Rick is saying, that creates this this aura of pretty much total immunity. I don't think that's actually going to hold up for very long. You know, maybe about 5 years before they get another case that may not involve actually a president. It might involve a governor or something, because I think what's going to start happening is other executive type officials are going to try to make those same arguments at different levels of the courts. And the courts are just going to go, wait a minute, you know, George Washington would be rolling over in his grave if he, you know, if he could, because that's not what they intended at the Constitutional Convention. So,
ponder this. I think you're wrong. I think that court decision is actually fairly sound and fairly common sense. It will, of course, official acts of the president have to be immune from prosecution. It's an official act of the president of the United States. And I think the minority, the minority or the contrary have taken it to the extremes of saying, well, he can do whatever he wants then. No, he can't do whatever he wants. He has to only do whatever he wants allowed by the Constitution within an official act. So to your point, maybe it's going to change, but it's going to be distinguishing, narrowing what official acts are. So I think it's actually a fairly rational decision, although taken to its logical absurdity of potential, what is that? All the potential crises it could allow. Yeah, but it's not going to allow. Our country is stronger than that. Anyway, agree or disagree?
I agree with you. And I think we actually probably agree more on that decision than, you know, what you're making it out to be, you know, because I think, yeah, they're not going to overrule the whole thing immediately. But I think what you're going to see is an erosion of all of that, because they're not going to let elected officials become totally lawless.
They're not. We won't.
Yeah. I have a sort of best case scenario and worst case scenario. I should say at first that I think the best case scenario is far more likely, which is that the Supreme Court of the United States will accept whatever case and decide whatever they need to decide to make sure that they have election results in a timely way.
I agree.
The X factor that I don't think is likely, but you know, like Rick said, politics is weird now. Seems to be getting weirder, which would be individual people who don't like the Supreme Court decision for one reason or another. Essentially saying, I want to encouraging faithless electors and throwing the election into the House if that would benefit one side or the other. I don't think it's going to happen, but
it's a very unpleasant, awkward, tough situation for America if that were to happen.
And I don't put it past either party, by the way. I think both parties have people who are capable of doing that kind of thing.
All right, Jake, we have to read The Remnant, huh?
Yeah, I haven't read that one. So
I haven't read that one either. Okay, last call. We've almost gone an hour and a half. Dave, Rick, Bart, Professor, any last comments or questions? I think this is helpful. I've made my solid prediction. I'm sticking with it until Wednesday when I figure out how to nuance how I was wrong. I don't think I'm going to be wrong, though.
I wouldn't be against your prediction of a blowout either way. That way we avoid all this nonsense. So I'm kind of hoping for that, and I'm hoping for divided government. I want Republicans to have one house and Democrats to have another. So that will always help. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, nice conservative approach. Thanks, Dave. Last call, Bart or Rick. All right, Professor, do you have any concluding thoughts for election 2024 a couple days in advance?
No, I just hope everybody had good civics teachers when they were in high school, and that the better angels of their natures come out in the next few weeks.
Good comment, Jake. Keep up the good work with those high school students of yours. All right, let's declare victory for today. Thanks, gentlemen, and we'll see you next Friday to talk about how we were wrong or right.
Yeah.
Well,
appreciate it. Easy.
All right. Thank y'all.